Again, another fantasy progression that shows you the more powered up you get, the more hair you have. How does that make you feel?
Every subgenre could be an erotica subgenre. Think if they made Dragon Ball literature.
A fantasy book of you are trying to build a farm so that you can be the farm boy trope in an epic fantasy.
Fine.
Yeah.
Harry Potter's a portal
Who looks
fantasy.
stupid now? We both do.
We both do.
Welcome back to another Tutor Ramble episode. I'm one of your hosts, Austin.
I'm the other host, Richard.
This is your 26 fantasy genres that every reader should know. We're going to break down, like we did in our part 1 of this episode, which just came out last Monday or Friday, whichever day it was that it came out. We have 26 of them. We just covered 13 in the first one, and we're going to cover the rest of the fantasy subgenres. What makes them good? What makes them bad? How do they work? What are some examples? And we're starting off with none other than, we're going to settle down a little bit. We ended talking about erotic fantasy and milking, and it got disturbing. This one, we're talking
Milking
about,
that's not milking.
yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah,
I don't like that.
I don't like using the term milking in that setting. It's not, doesn't work.
How about this?
Not comfortable.
Pull back cozy.
Ah, yes. Well, for some people, Morning Glory Milking Farm is a cozy read. I don't associate with those people, but cozy fantasy. Your
Cozy fantasy is the next subgenre.
legends, legends and lattes is commonly. I think that is the book that kind of sparked this new wave of cozy fantasy.
A lot of people associate cozy fantasy with that book.
Yeah, it's not like that book it made it new, but it just kind of refreshed the genre, and seems to be that a lot of publishers seems to actually be publishing this nowadays.
Yes. Howl's Moving Castle is another example where any Studio Ghibli, I believe that's Ghibli, not Ghibli, but however you pronounce it, any Studio Ghibli movie that you watch is cozy fantasy.
Yeah, generally.
Every single one. And that's what that Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, go down the line. Actually, Princess Mononoke, less so. That's
not
more,
as much.
there's more action, but Spirited Away, cozy fantasy. Totoro, My Neighbor Totoro, cozy fantasy. You have your Legends of Lattes, Howl's Moving Castle, and those Ghibli movies have book forms as well. So what is cozy fantasy? And how do you do it well?
I mean, ultimately, if the end of the world is at stake and it's not done satirically, like, oh, the end of the world is at stake and actually our characters don't care and it's about something else, that I guess could count. But point is, it's not the end of the world. It's normally just cozy feeling, obviously, and the character's biggest trouble is, starting up a new cafe, or, starting a new business, or trying to build a farm, something like that. Low stakes.
What if a fantasy book of you are trying to build a farm so that you can be the farm boy trope in an epic fantasy? Like, the job of the cozy fantasy is you want to build the farm so that you could be an adventurer like all those other adventures.
I just
books.
thought of a hilariously bad isekai, like Japanese isekai. It's like,
yeah,
I've been reincarnated. I've been isekai to a fantasy world like 5 years before the hero is born, and I need to build the
farm.
I need to build the farm where the farm boy hero will grow up.
I think that's a story. You have a story there. That's cozy fantasy.
That's probably, honestly, it probably already exists. I wouldn't
be
put
surprised.
I wouldn't put past Japan.
I want to see.
They
I
make
want to
some
see
weird.
That's
stuff.
a genius. That would be incredible. I think so. The point you're getting at is low stakes. It's got to be a low stakes story. Coffee shop. That's a great example of one. Legends and Lattes.
Mm-hmm.
Low stakes, comforting story where when you're reading it, it's like getting wrapped with a blanket. You are reading this story, and why Studio Ghibli is used a lot as an example for cozy fantasy is it's almost nostalgic too. Often there's a nostalgic atmosphere you can feel with a cozy fantasy because maybe it brings you back to better times. It brings you back to simpler, lower stakes things. You don't have to read fantasy to have these big dragons and battles and all these scenes. So I guess a big advantage of the cozy fantasy is you get to explore this nostalgia, which is one of the most fascinating emotions, if you can call it an emotion. It's
Yeah.
phenomenon.
It's an
Nostalgia.
emotion.
It's so fascinating because nostalgia is both. You look with nostalgia as both a very bittersweet. You look back fondly. It's a mixture of happiness and sadness. It's that strange mixture of feeling.
The happy feeling of remembering the past, but the sadness that knowing it's over.
Yeah, it's so good. You ever had those moments of you are living in a current moment where you know you're going to be nostalgic about it in the future? That you go, oh, I'm living the good days right now.
Very rarely, but occasionally. You set some time of like, great way this works is you want to remember more. Don't remember the memory. Remember you remembering the memory. And that's how you carry memories further in the future.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like think almost out loud of what describe something that happened to you and relive the tale by telling someone else or telling yourself in the mirror, and you will remember you telling it. Sorry, this is just the memory trick of like, there's a handful of childhood memories that like when I was like 2 or 3 years old that I told my parents at 8. And then at 8, I told that again, me remembering me telling it at 8 at like 12. And I've carried it forward where I now still vividly remember these memories that I carried forward.
That makes sense. I think there's so many. I was looking at my notes the other day, as in just iPhone notes, going back to, wow, how long? I have over 1,000 because I just don't delete them. I make a note and it goes away. And I looked at something that I had written down and went, I forgot that happened. There's so many things that you'll just lose. Obviously, memory, it's finite. You can't remember everything. And also, something needs to usually trigger a memory of you say a word or something's happening to where you then remember something that happened to you. But that's the thing. You can, if you don't keep talking about your life or talking about stories, you'll just lose a lot of it over time. And even though you'll talk about your remembering of the actual original thing, the story will both be there, but also be different from what actually happened. Because the more you talk about it, the more embellished some parts get, the more you lose some details, but gain details that might not have been there. But it's the feeling you got. You think you remember that detail. That's also part of
I don't remember the memory anymore. I remember me telling it about the memory.
Yeah.
And I remember describing, and I remember myself I remember remembering, which is not quite the same, but it's still fun. But that's kind of, I'm thinking cozy fantasy is a memory that you don't have, but you still feel.
Remember me when it's time to say goodbye. Remember me. Coco is a fucking awesome movie.
Does that count as cozy fantasy?
No, it's not cozy. It's just you kept saying remember. So I said, and I was trying to talk about memories.
Well, we're talking about how to fail at it. Let's say that it's not high stakes. It is low stakes and all this stuff.
Yeah.
How would you mess it up?
So messing up cozy fantasy. My first gut thought was it could be hard to mess up because cozy atmosphere, low stakes, the requirements to be cozy fantasy, you can easily create a plot that is low stakes. I guess now the hard part is how to get someone invested in low stakes. How to get someone invested in a very narrow thing, because maybe it could be sometimes easier to go, oh, look at this big bad villain, look at all the world's at stake, and that could be something that automatically is more intriguing to people. So it's going, why should I care about the coffee shop or the person trying to build that?
Well, it's a great lesson in epic fantasy. You can lean on the epic plot and the big things that are happening and for your reader to care about. But ultimately, if you're a good writer, you know that the reader's really going to care about the personal attachment your main character has. In a cozy fantasy, you don't get to lean on the world ending. You don't get to lean on this intricate plot with the fate of kings or whatever have you is going to happen, or even just the main character dying. You have to solely get your reader invested in the small personal stake that your main character has, And even if it is just running a coffee shop or building a farm, it's important. You make it important enough to the character, and therefore it is important to the reader.
And that's the key portion of if you fail at getting a good antagonist or obstacle, and that obstacle doesn't have to be person, could just be as in it could be man versus nature, man versus self, all those different antagonists you could have. But that's the thing. Whatever is stopping them from getting said coffee shop or whatever the goal is, has to also be an interesting enough narrow stake of why is it so difficult. And that's the fun thing to kind of overcome. Or it could even be, because it's cozy fantasy, it doesn't necessarily have to be, look, it's such a dire obstacle this is. It could just be a day in the life kind of living this cozy feel, which a lot of Ghibli stuff is. It's just life is happening and you're having this nostalgic feel. And I want to make sure I get this right, but in Japan, they have a plot structure called Kisho Tenkatsu, which is essentially not necessarily a 3-act structure of act 1 happens, act 2, act 3, but, or, inciting incident, that how we understand act structure. They kind of have this thing that's set up of you're introduced to your characters and scene, plot happens and moves, and it just keeps riding until toward the end there's a twist of events or something happens toward the 3rd act, and then there's your resolution of it's more of a there's necessarily not even inciting, wow, look how invested you are in this. I'm butchering this a little bit, but it's a different way of trying to structure a story that can more lean on the cozy fantasy side, because you're not immediately looking at the story with these high stakes or this. I'm butchering this a lot, but you get what I'm saying.
Maybe an analogy of difference is the difference between a car and a train, where your standard story structure is more like a car trip of you getting in, turning on the gas, and like going. And there's kind of a process of like getting the car started versus hopping on a train of the story is going, you hop on and then hop off.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a constant movement, not necessarily anything that started it or, an inciting incident, but you're there for a time.
Yeah. It's a blip of time. Maybe that's the way I look at cozy fantasy. You're just getting a little look at this person's life, and it's cozy feel.
We haven't read too much cozy fantasy, so if you have any recommendations, let us know down below.
We have read one, Kingdoms of Deaths and Latte, or Kingdoms of Bread and Lattes. There's this.
Nick, do you mind showing that meme?
We'll have to send it next way. Top tier meme.
Top tier meme. I love it.
Our next one, Rich. What is our next one?
Our next one is military Flintlock fantasy. This is a personal favorite of mine. I quite enjoy this kind of stuff. My introduction to this genre was the Powder Mage series. But Flintlock, military fantasy, basically soldier's life. It's normally focused on the soldier's life. You focus on battle campaigns, warfare. There's normally a crew, a company, but it's about a soldier's life, ultimately. Flintlock fantasy leaning more into the, because you could have the military side of things being medieval, which is more medieval fantasy, but if you want to lean on toward military, it normally involves kind of magic, guns, mixing of the two.
Napoleonic.
Yeah. That's normally what you associate with military Flintlock fantasy.
Yep.
So, Brian McClellan does a pretty good job with that as well. So he, not just the Powder Mage series, but his second series. I'm looking at the title. I'm trying to remember the name of the series. The Glassum Immortals.
Yes,
the Glassum Immortals.
What was book one called? Jeez.
In the Shadow of Lightning. Yeah.
You looked at it?
I did look at it.
Yeah, okay. That would have been way too impressive if you had that call back. Yeah, so
I could remember the title. I couldn't remember the series name.
But yeah, warfare strategy, soldier's life. This is your. I like to. Maybe this is your person who, if you're reading fiction and you like to read history books or warfare books, it's just if you want some of that in fantasy and to just get a added magic. Often, the gunpowder mage. Say it again. Powder mage. Powder mage, for example, is the magic system is directly related to the gunpowder. And
yes. And it's also, gunpowder still works like gunpowder too.
Right.
It's just there's also a magical element to it.
So how does that's a specific way of actually implementing the magic system to the guns used in the world, but not necessarily the military Flintlock type of stories. Doesn't have to have a magical element to the warfare and fighting.
Mhm.
It could just be a military Flintlock setting that explores a soldier's life in a fantastical or fantasy world.
There's also a degree of separation of, I think, the military fantasy is definitely focused on the substance of the story, where Flintlock can often just be this technology and setting.
Yeah.
An example of a Flintlock fantasy that's not necessarily a military fantasy would be Anthony Ryan's Draconis Memoria series, where the magic system does have guns and a mix of how guns and magic work together. The level of technology is somewhat steampunky in a way, but that is a Flintlock fantasy that doesn't really go into a military aspect. It's not following the army. But then again, man, I'm reading some recent stuff of Blood and Fire is also
By Blood by Salt, you mean?
By Blood by Salt. Thank
See,
you.
all
You
those
caught
titles,
it.
Too
Many blood, salt of the
fires and bloods and salts.
fires of bloods
and
and
milk.
salts and milk.
Why has everything got milk in the title nowadays? What the hell?
God, the milk bros are just terrible.
Wait, Milk Bros?
Oh, the milk Patreon people. They've been making memes.
I thought
they
you were
made
calling us the Milk Bros. Okay,
No.
the book club, yes.
No.
Yeah.
Inside Patreon joke. It's fine. You're better off not associating with those people. But
you've been reading a lot of those style of books
yeah,
recently.
by Blood by Salt
Mhm.
is a military fantasy, but not a Flintlock fantasy. By the way, I'm quite liking it. I'm not done yet, but I'm liking it so far.
Good,
so
good. That'll be our next SPFBO.
yes,
breakdown
that'll
read.
be one
Yes.
of our next upcoming reviews.
Yes. So, anything else for military Flintlock?
No, I think the way to do it wrong, the way to do it right. If you're doing it right, you are not only connecting with your character, but I think you need to give. If you're doing the military side of things, you need to have some emotional connection to the company and the soldiers' camaraderie. I think that's a very important element to it. The way you do a military fantasy wrong is probably focusing too much on the battles themselves and not the soldier's life and how it feels to be a soldier. I think that's generally a more compelling element of those types
The
of stories.
heroes, wouldn't the heroes be a military fantasy? It's also in the Grimdark, kind of overlaps in some.
Yep.
But yeah,
I haven't read that one yet, though. So
you talk about it a lot, though.
I have talked about it a lot because everyone keeps talking to me about it.
Ah.
And I'm waiting on you
So you're just
to read it.
You're just recalling a.
There I go
something
again,
told-
just blaming you.
Wait,
I'm blaming you on why I haven't read something.
Oh.
That's a bad habit of mine.
a break from our sponsor, World Anvil. Thank you so much to our sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil at worldanvil.com. You can go and build out the story you've always dreamed to write. Or if you're already writing your story and need a good organization tool, World Anvil has it all.
You can build maps, character sheets, connect them all together. The big draw is you can do it if you're watching us, you're writing stories, but also if you're a D&D master, you want to create these interesting characters and craft these great worlds and maps. World Anvil is a great tool for you to be able to use it, and it's free. You could try out their awesome free features, and if you want more, hey, you could pay for some of the premium features. And if you use the code Ramble, you get a little bit of a discount. How much can they get off?
51% off.
Look at
My
that.
God. 51% off for a yearly subscription if you use our code Ramble at checkout. Recommend using them. It really needs to organize things. Use map making tools, D&D campaigns to storytelling. Write your own subgenre. Come up with something. If you want to create the 27th subgenre, that's up to you. It's your choice. The tools are at your fingertips.
I doubt you could do it, but I want you to try.
Try it. Thanks, World Anvil. Getting back to the episode. Bye. Thank you, World Anvil. Okay, now we had to have the ad break because of the tension. We're good now.
We're good.
Next one is Fables and Fairy Tales. Fables and Fairy Tales, different definitions for each of them. So, for example, a fable is a short story featuring animals, plants, or inanimate objects as characters that behave like humans, anthropomorphism. And example of this, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Then we have a fairy tale. Fairy tales, people have different definitions. There's broad definitions about it, but one generally agreed upon is it's children's stories about magical and imaginary beings and lands. It's pretty broad, but you get at the end of the story happily ever after you get your Cinderellas, basically Disney adaptations. That's your...
Unless you're, Grimm's fairy tales or Germans, basically.
German
then
fairy
you get
tales,
all unhappy endings.
Actually, pretty much a lot of the fairy tales that are adapted to have a much lighter tone than maybe they originally did. A lot of them are associated with children's fairy tales, but I think originally had a lot
Disney
darker.
looked at the German stories and went, that's nice and all, but also real depressing for American children. And so let's not do that. Let's make them happy.
You read a German fairy tale and you're telling me you're just shocked 2 world wars sprung out of that country. Like you read that and you know something's happening with these people at some point.
These people are... you could tell a lot about a people by their fairy tales they tell their children.
Actually, you could tell a lot about a society by the stories they tell. It's very true.
That is not inaccurate, but also I don't know if someone could use that as a prescription. You look around like, what? That's another question. I want to hear down in the comments.
Oh.
What current nation, like looking around the globe, what current nation do you think is going to cause the most amount of problems? And explain yourself with the currently actively told children's stories.
Oh.
Like, look around. Like, what children's stories are causing you to think, that nation could be a problem. We need to keep an eye on them.
Specifically children's stories. You're not saying, okay.
They're children's stories.
Because those are the people that are going to be the adults in 20 years.
Yeah.
So you got to...
Like, Americans, when you look at, like, Coco Melon, like, we are setting ourselves up for Brave New World. You don't have to worry about Americans in, like, the next couple generations.
They're safe until we get rid of Coco Melon.
We are cooked. Like, we are just going to be ready, just absolutely ready for the Matrix pods.
Wow.
We're there. So America may be the dominant, world hegemony nation now, but don't worry. We're going off the cliff.
You can explain all of older Gen Z, millennials, that group, our age group, or older Gen Z out there. You can explain all of our actions and how we act in society by SpongeBob SquarePants. I know you didn't watch this, but SpongeBob, it was one of those unifying, nostalgic, cultural phenom that we all reference. But you look at SpongeBob and you go, I think that could explain why this generation is the way we are.
There is a general thing of I generally like people who grew up on 90s television. Like they grew up on that stuff, like that 90s television. 2000s television has some positives. There's some good stuff there too. But
however, you look at 90s television, it was just racy enough because it was still the 90s.
It was fun.
It was fun. They were still willing to, make some punches. Go, that's a
a spicy. But also,
joke.
It's heartfelt and there's
also
a sense of camaraderie there.
It's that mix, that blending. Again, is this us just looking to our childhoods and going, hey, we're born
I have a
then
hard time imagining that some child is going to grow up and go, yeah, Coco Melon. Absolutely peak. Like peak children's story.
But
now,
also Coco Melon's children.
The equivalent for me would be the Teletubbies.
Yeah.
And to be fair,
Barney.
The Teletubbies are weird. They're very, very, very weird.
That's why you can also explain our generation.
Yeah.
By looking at the Teletubbies.
The smiling baby as the sun. And just everything else about it is... Who was dropping
strange.
acid making that? And I don't want to be in that person's mind.
Yeah, Teletubbies was always strange. I was never a Teletubbies kid. Oh, and not that I had a choice because parents would just turn it on for you. But so we're one to talk. What were we?
I was a Thomas the Tank Engine kid.
I hated trains.
You hated trains?
I did.
But trains are like literally the best. They're the coolest thing.
Nope, dinosaurs. I was a dinosaurs kid.
Ugh.
I was an army action figure guy.
Trains beat dinosaurs every time. You put your little dinosaur figures on the train tracks and you run them over.
But then I have my military guys on the okay.
You don't have have positive memories of your dad building a train set with you and like doing train tracks and like setting your Thomas the Tank Engine to go over.
The cool thing Dad and I did, I was in Cub Scouts, and you know those race derbies you do, you make those little cars.
Yeah.
What are the derbies? Oh,
Roller, no.
why can't I remember the name of them? But you would make cars and you'd race them down this ramp.
Yeah.
And every year I won an award 5-6 years straight that I did it. And every year the award I won was kid who got the most help from his dad. They actually made an award that had that printed out and gave that. So we never run the race, but every year my dad would bring us downstairs in the basement into the construction area where we'd build this thing. And like he'd have me like, hey, do this, paint this part here. But the thing would come out by a pristine as if an adult made it. He would cut it, use all of his gadgets, and he would make all these cars art pieces, actual art pieces of an actual shark shape of a one was a school bus shape, one was a shark, one was a turtle. He would just say, Austin, what do you want to make this year? And then I'd go, oh, I want a turtle. For some reason I wanted a turtle. And he'd go, oh fuck, because that's hard to do. and then he'd make and paint the I still have them. He still has them back in his closet. But I lost every year miserably, and he tried to get it better every year to adding weights to it, but the shapes I always asked for were not aerodynamic enough to win the race. But they looked cool. That's my story.
That was the same thing with mine. Is my dad would let me build the race car I wanted, and I was always upset that I lost, but my dad would refuse to like guide me in the direction of like, hey, let's make this actually win, because he didn't care. It was like, so like I remember the one I remember at least was I made the little derby car that could fit a Lego Ninja Turtle in it, and I made it a Ninja Turtle race car.
Nice. That's cool.
Very much not aerodynamic.
No. I asked for a school bus. You think that was winning any races? It was not.
I remember the kids who like their dad just wanted to win, and you see it, and it's literally just a wedge.
A torpedo.
It's so like the perfect plain wedge with weight in it, and like they shaved they went by the rule book of like how much you could shave off of the balsa wood, and like they hollowed it out.
Hollowed the bottom. People did that all the
It
time.
was the exact weight that you could take off. There's also the parents who had like wooden plugs, so when you go for the weighing, like you have the wooden plug in it that makes it heavier or like lighter, and then when you go to actually race it, you put the plug back in, it's heavier. Yeah, a bunch of cheaters. I had fun with my Ninja Turtle race car. Yeah. Always lost.
Do you think your Ninja Turtle would have won, or my oddly shaped ones?
I'd like to think close. It probably would have been close.
It would have been.
Yeah.
We would have been the last two. But yeah, I vividly remember those. And I'm trying to find out Cub Scout car races, what they were called. The Pinewood Derby.
Pinewood Derby.
I believe that's what it was. Yes. Those were the best. Did you have the cake making competitions too? Did you ever have those?
I don't remember. No.
Where you had to, that was the best day because everybody would come in with making a cake, and then you go and taste test all of them and judge them. Cub Scouts was great. Everyone should do Cub Scouts.
Mine was great until they just stopped doing the camping stuff, and then Dad kind of just took me out of that and said, let's just go camping, because they keep making you do Sudoku puzzles and crossword, and that's
you had a lame Cub Scout troop. We did.
We
did all of that.
It was cool.
We whittled
until it was lame, and then my dad was just like, let's go camping, and then we did that, and that was fun.
Did you ever do Boy Scouts?
That's true. Cub Scouts was great. Boy Scouts was lame, and then
got it.
Boy Scouts was the lame couple years, and then I just went with my dad. We got off topic.
Feeling a bit nostalgic now. A bit cozy.
A little cozy.
But we were talking about fables and fairy tales. Fables and fairy tales are happily ever after type of stories. This is where when you ask somebody what is the fantasy genre, you had a funny comment.
Just a magical story. Like, this would be a great children's movie.
What?
Of, a kid with his dad builds the worst Pinewood Derby. but has this great love for this derby car because they're, built it together with his dad. And then all of a sudden wakes up and he's in this big race and he has to race his Pinewood Derby against all the other like professionally done Pinewood Derby cars. and he's losing and he has to, I think there's a story there that's nostalgic.
Comes in last, but actually wins because of the connection with the father and son.
Either that or somehow works together to make it like
Better.
Better. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's something there.
There's something there.
There's something
There's
that
magic.
would scratch the nostalgic itch for a lot of boys that did Pinewood Derby.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope they still do that. They got to, right?
Yeah.
I hope so. If
They
not,
probably do.
yeah, I really hope so. That is, well, we explained fables and fairy tales perfectly, I think. The fable and fairy tale of children's story about magical elements. People often will differentiate, say, fantasy is different than fairy tales, and they're not exactly the same. A lot of these could have some overlap. So when saying the term fantasy in the first place, fantasy is a broad definition that people will sometimes not include fairy tales. They'll say fantasy and fairy tales different. However, using the fantasy definition of things that are impossible or things that are just kind of magical and using it the very, very broad ways of putting it, fairy tales was often what people associated with what we today call fantasy. Sorry, that's a long way of saying that, but Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, he had an essay that came out in the 1930s, or what was it? But yeah, 30s, called On Fairy Stories, because the word fantasy wasn't around yet. So when he's saying on fairy stories, he's talking about
the word existed, but they didn't associate it with
this genre. Thank you. So fairy stories were often this kind of blend where we used that and fantasy were sometimes synonymous, but not, and it's got a weird back and forth. But the way that we're using the term is Cinderella, those kind of things. That's the fairy tale. And with that, how do you pull off a successful fairy tale, a successful fable, and all of these stuff versus failing miserably?
Oh man, this honestly is a hard thing for me to answer because the fairy tales that survive are the ones that did it right. And to know
You're right.
And know how to do it wrong, you have to have examples. I don't particularly have any good examples of a fairy story that did it wrong. Do you? Because I'm honestly not sure. How do you the only thing other than a bad moral lesson, ultimately, something that is drivel to both children and adults.
That's the key, I think. Yeah, if you don't have something that connects to the soul of a child and adults alike, that's the point of a fairy tale, I think, is conveying some sort of message of, could just be something, I mean, hey, you live happily ever after, could be some uplifting, not talking about the grim fairy tales and those stories, but some uplifting, courageous, something that is admirable.
Is a lesson. I think the important thing is a lesson. A lesson can have a happy ending or a sad ending, but it ultimately taught you something.
Yeah,
about
right.
living life.
You're right.
And
maybe I associate too often happiness with fairy tales, but
yeah,
you're right.
But Grimm's fairy tales do offer lessons,
Yes.
even if they are bitter ends.
Yeah. So is it something that is agreeable? Is it a good moral message? Did you effectively say something that touches the soul in a way?
Fair enough. Moving on to the next one.
Steampunk and Silkpunk.
Now, okay. I know what steampunk is.
Yes.
What is silkpunk?
That is a subgenre definition that Ken Liu came up with.
Oh. So
Ken Liu, author of Dandelion Dynasty. Steampunk incorporates technology and aesthetic design inspired by 19th century industrialism. And that steampunk is, steam-powered engines, all that kind of 19th century feel. Silkpunk is defined as speculative fiction and fantasy that blends East Asian antiquity. So traditional technologies, materials, aesthetics like bamboo, silk, and paper, with often fantastical or futuristic innovations. So steampunk and silkpunk, it's a sprouting off subgenre where silkpunk is more Eastern-inspired technologies adding fantasy onto it.
Your Grace of Kings by Ken Liu would maybe be silkpunk then.
He would define it as that too.
Interesting.
Yeah. But you often see steampunk with these industrialized stories. And how do you often, is there a steampunk that we've read together at least? Because I can't think of any. that we might have.
The closest one would be, no, I don't think we've read them together, but again, Anthony Ryan's the
Draconis?
Draconis Memoria
Mhm.
is either your Flintlock fantasy or your steampunk-ish. It kind of bounces between the line because some of the setting is steampunk-ish and then some is not. It's more in the jungle, woods, natural environment. So
Yes.
it bounces between. But one that we've read together, I'm trying to think about it, but
Not much, but I think on
no.
the Steampunk Silkpunk side,
I think it's hard to do one of those in a book setting.
it's
Generally,
also
it's just a visual, like the charm of steampunk is seeing all the gears moving, and it's a very visually appealing. I don't know how you would get the same effect in a novel.
this is also one of those subgenres that's entirely in the setting.
Mhm.
You can't. The message of the story doesn't change whether it's steampunk or silkpunk or the type of characters. It's just, do you have this type of tech? Do you have this type of technology?
Yeah, I mean, maybe with steampunk, if you were to have some type of message or theme, it would be focused on the industrialization.
Yeah.
Either it's because often with steampunk, the feeling is things are fast, things are moving, things are changing. Just because very often in those type of stories, you
Mhm.
see it where, just last week, we were still using candles, and now like lights are going up everywhere. Often a very changing, like a setting. Sorry, a setting scene is some workman changing out the gas powered light, like street lights for electric lights, and it's like, oh, okay, the changing of the times. So
Yes.
that feeling of industrialization and speed and progress and technology moving forward.
Here's one in the show form, but Korra, Legend of Korra.
Sure.
Is more steampunk because I personally loved the first episode of Last Airbender. That type of setting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what label you'd put on that setting, but then jumps forward to the Legend of Korra, where technology has moved so far. It's more steampunk. You have airplanes and a fast-moving society that the Avatar's trying to catch up with the times in a way too, because the society is progressing so fast. What does the magic do in a realm of the steampunk?
Just thought of another one where Greenbone Saga, but if this is not like, this is steampunk fantasy, I think maybe a central element to this subgenre is the combative nature of technology and magic and the natural.
That's it, yeah.
And so if in a standard steampunk story, you wouldn't normally have that. Maybe you have it a little bit of how technology kind of, steamrolls over nature.
Yep.
But with steampunk fantasy, it's often that the magic is dying or the magic is not useful anymore. You see people.
How do you keep up?
How does the magical, how does the fantastical keep up with the ever marching progress of technology?
What's the point of the Avatar? With technology can almost meet what the Avatar is doing, or can quell. There's the Legend of Korra starts off with there are soldiers in Legend of Korra that are able to mute the Avatar's ability very early on, and you're asking, oh, why? What kind of tech do they have that's able to quell the Avatar?
Yeah.
Whoa. Our next one is Sword and Sorcery and Arthurian type of stories, which we read The Winter King, and fantastic book. This is a subgenre that it can feel classic. It has your heroes, your Arthurian type of character with this sense of honor, the sense of justice, and it's your stories that have fantastical elements but don't dive too much into the fantasy as far as your hard magic, really. Sword and Sorcery and Arthurian legends are more known for dabbling with the fantasy of your Merlin type of characters, your character who is a sorcerer of types and it's a little bit in the mystery. You have a soft magic feel to it, and your hero who takes a sword out of the stone and rises to the challenge. Your Sword and Sorcery have that, and they typically take place in medieval times, early to late medieval. That's typically your setting. What do you see in Sword and Sorcery? Do you see a lot of what are some of the correct ways to do it and incorrect ways to get one of those stories told?
If I had to pick, I think the most important element, if the most important magical element of that is typically fate.
Oh, that's
So,
a good one.
like,
Yeah.
that's sword and sorcery. You're gonna have how does fate play? It's normally one or the other of either fate is actually true, it's real, and how do characters deal with it, or the lack of fate, and there's vice versa. You kind of tell both sides of that story. But swords and sorcery typically have something to do with fate or prophecy. That's at least it stands out to me.
Yeah.
Of that genre.
Yeah, the story. If you're reading a sword and sorcery Arthurian type of book, another example is Conan.
Mhm.
What's something that throws you off? Is there something that you don't want to see in those types of? How do you do it wrong?
I think the way you do it wrong would be too much of a focus on honestly the sword and the sorcery stuff.
Really?
You know what I mean? It's the sword and the sorcery is a background. It is the magic sword doesn't if you focus too much on the magic sword, it's not that important. What's important about Excalibur is that Arthur has it. It's not necessarily about the magic. It's not necessarily about these little things in the back. The magic is a backseat to the actual legend, and it's the human characters rising to the challenge.
And typically they're very charismatic.
Yeah.
It's if you have this hero who commands the attention of others, they're inspiring in some sort of ways. That's your kind of heroes you're looking for in these stories.
Mhm.
Think knight in shining armor. I think that's a lot of what you get, and it puts you in that medieval setting automatically. It's very easy to have a sword and sorcery and just give, because its swords are involved in your Arthurian legends, they have to take place in that time for the most part. But that kind of story can be a lot of fun and sometimes delves into the more historical fiction aspect. If there are less fantasy elements involved and more so just looking at a time period and changing up some things and adding a little bit of magic. So, for example, Lines of Al-Rasan is a fantasy-ish, the historical fiction. It blurs the line.
Honestly, fantasy in name mostly, and technically one magical element. Other than that, it's historical fiction.
So I often think of the Sword and Sorcery's Arthurian legends as kind of blending. Fantasy is the large term where you're saying, hey, things that are impossible. So it's fiction, but with some fantastical element, whatever you want to put in that. This type of category can also often be historical fiction. And if you like your Arthurian stories, The Winter King, top recommendation for me. The Winter King is a story that gives an alternate history. Well, this tale of Arthur, whether he's a legend or real, how true is our Arthurian story, and tries to give you what would have actually happened, who would have Arthur actually been, and here's an alternate history to England and to the Britons versus the Saxons, and how would that play out in an alternate history of Britain's past. That's typically your Arthurian stories. But yeah, do you like sword and sorcery stories? Are you a fan of them in general?
I generally like them. I don't know if it's my favorite genre.
Fair.
I would prefer epic fantasy over something like that as well.
Yeah. And these are typically less epic in nature. The sword and sorcery are about this charismatic figure or this person voying for courage and those kind of themes.
The main thing is it's generally, I think a lot of people would find sword and sorcery boring in the sense of you kind of know what's going to happen. And it takes the real skill of the author to tell a story that you know the ending, you know you know every element of it. It's not going to be surprising or shocking, but through the poetic words or just the little minutia details, it will suck you in. I think that's the very impressive thing. That's why Bernard Cornwell is such an impressive writer. From the very beginning, you know what's going to happen. You know almost every element of the story before it even happens, and yet it is still gripping and still thrilling. That's the impressive aspect of Sword Sorcery tales.
Yes, and a lot of it with Arthurian legends, you're asking how does this story tell it? Because you know the big things, you know Excalibur, you know
Mhm.
Lancelot. And the fun thing about Winter King is it takes a very different take on some of those characters that you think you know a lot about, which is neat.
Mhm.
So the next one we have up is urban and contemporary fantasy, and very simply put, it takes place in city environment.
Basically, the chief example, if you had to pick, would be the Dresden Files. That is basically the popular king of urban fantasy.
And the one that's coming to take its place is the Debt Collection by Andrew.
Yeah,
Sigils, Andrew Givler.
Andrew Givler, who he, by the way.
Yeah.
So, little aside on it is the Dresden Files is one of his favorite series,
Yes.
and he was actually able to get the same artist that did the Dresden Files for his books, which is so cool. So cool for him.
Very cool.
I do recommend it. It's especially, I think the first book is closer to middle grade, young adult novel, but quite enjoyed it. Really cool concept, and a lot of things go. We need to have him back on the channel as well. It's been a long time.
It has been a while. We got to shut up.
Actually, I also need to read his second book in his other his fantasy series.
Yes.
Or it's like actual fantasy series.
Yeah.
I need to. We'll do a video on that after you read the first book.
This is a good remander to reach back out.
Fake friend didn't read his first book.
I only read the 4 or 5 of them. Sorry.
I know.
But this urban contemporary fantasy takes place city environments and typically especially more modern day, and your fantasy elements are included. Your fantasy elements are included in what can often be the real world as well. So this might kind of blend in with low fantasy, because it could just take place in New York City.
I was going to ask, what's the difference between low fantasy and urban fantasy?
So low fantasy takes place on Earth. Urban fantasy, specifically city environment, bustling, loud, that kind of stuff, where you are in typically associated with skyscrapers. I couldn't find the word I was looking for, but you're localized to city versus low fantasy could be anywhere, just real world stuff. Urban fantasy adds in the element of magic. I haven't read Dresden Files. Have you at all? Did you ever pick up book 1?
Not yet. Okay. It's been on the list as soon as we
can. Endless TBR list.
The endless TBR list. Oh God.
But yeah, urban fantasy, I'm not well read in it, so I don't want to speak too much about what's good and bad about it, but it is one of those subgenres that, to me, is more fast-paced thriller. So reading the Debt Collection, for example, it's kind of those quirky, quippy characters can often be associated with this, but also the pace can be associated with the setting. The setting's loud and bustling, so the pace of these books can typically be your thriller types, your page turners,
your thriller, your noirs. I mean, that's the kind of vibe you're telling. Those are the types of stories you're going to be telling, and then just adding the fantasy twist to it.
Yes.
Either a fantasy world with cities or our world and the city. So
yeah. And most of it, so it would be both a low fantasy and an urban fantasy, but you'd say urban fantasy to get more specific.
How do you mess up urban fantasy, do you think? I mean, you haven't read too much of this, so do we want to skip our opinion on how to mess it up and how to do it well?
Yeah. If you take place in a farm, you mess up urban fantasy. I'm doing my same bit. It's stupid.
I would say it's the separation of the fun of urban fantasy is the merging of the city and magic and how deeply integrated into it. Even if it's secret, it's still like a part of it, rather than with Hogwarts type of deal. Yes, it's kind of integrated, but it's its own world. It's in our world, but it's very separated. So like there is the city, there is London, and then you basically go away.
You make a great point, because we're talking fantasy subgenres. The thing that irks me the most, that also irks C.S. Lewis, we agree on this point, in his On Science Fiction essay, we covered on the channel. But the thing that irks me a lot is if your fantasy setting just uses the fantasy as a veneer, where you could have, C.S. Lewis says, you could have just told that story back at home. If you could have you just added the fantasy and it's just this shade that you added on top for sprinkles just to call it fantasy
Mhm.
in that way. So the way to get urban fantasy wrong is if the fantasy is just a veneer of you can still write a great urban fiction book, that's great, but the point of it being an urban fantasy is what does the fantasy actually change about the story?
Yeah.
Your point of when we were saying steampunk and silkpunk, a cool aspect about those stories in the fantasy genre is how does industrialization combat with magic? Which one reigns supreme? How does the magic react to it? What is this?
And that being a story mostly of technology versus nature,
Exactly.
with magic taking, because magic is more bombastic and exciting
Yeah.
than trees generally.
Hey, Tolkien wouldn't say so.
And you know what?
Tolkien wrote a whole fantasy story series, and he said trees are still the best.
Trees are the best. You know, you're right.
Talking trees are better, though.
But the point being,
Yeah.
that's more bombastic.
Yep.
And so it can be more exciting of the whole technology versus nature. That's why steampunk fantasy could be really, really fun.
Yes.
Same thing with urban fantasy of it, like you need both of them together. So the magic needs to matter to the story
Mhm.
and matter to the world, like in the city aspect of like, how does this magic interact with, bustling crowds and tight corners and the tight living spaces of a city, maybe the dreariness of it. So those elements need to matter rather than just a thriller story with that, has like magical spells and can use fireball, where it's like you could have just gave him a gun. It would have been the same thing.
Exactly. And my major complaint from Jade City, have not read on past book 1, but Jade City was this, not spoiling it, was this story that takes place in a mafiosa type of world and setting, and it has this magical jade. And to me, that was something that's a story you could have told at home that adds on a fantasy element, and still people could still like and enjoy that story, but it didn't do enough with the jade, it didn't do enough with the fantasy to justify the fantasy for me yet. I didn't read the whole series. Also, Fonda Lee, talking to her, having her on the channel, she's great, and it makes me want to read the next book regardless, even though the first one didn't wow me. But that type of stuff, when you could mess up urban fantasy by the fantasy portion, I think is more important even than the urban in that sentence, because that's the frustrating part of, hey, you have the opportunity to use fantasy, use it, make it interesting. How does this affect the city? Be Spider-Man so webbing around, just make a cool magic thing at least, or you get some cool shots in your head when you're reading the page going, at least make the magic cool, the art of cool.
If you can't make it important, make it fun.
That's all. Yes. So now our next, hey, here's a very fun one. Lit RPG and progression fantasy. One we've covered all 7 books. It's out so far. Dungeon Crawler Carl.
Yep. And I would say, of my lack of reading in lit RPG, the king of lit RPG fantasy books.
What is lit RPG for those who don't know?
Literature role-playing game, basically. And generally sets in, there's normally some type of game mechanic with levels, gaining skill points to grow and, get stronger. It's typically lit RPG.
Yeah.
Same thing with progression, is typically leaning a bit more toward the fantastical of, aura and training and improving yourself and ascending to a higher level. Think if they made Dragon Ball literature. That's progression fantasy for you right there.
The way to do this wrong, I think, okay, a flaw of the genre, the subgenre, is sometimes if you get your characters progressing so much and it's a long series, if they get so powerful, then it's hard to increase the stakes, or it's hard to find interesting challenges for your character to solve. That's where you can get into sometimes dead ends of, well, my character has the ability to fly, click, snap his fingers and kill his enemies any moment he wants. And I'm exaggerating, but if you have all of these abilities, how do you then make an interesting obstacle and book? Now, great writers can face that and still make it interesting, still make you care about the characters and the world around it. So that what I say is the hard thing to do. And Dungeon Crawler, as we're in book 7 now, the powers get more and more. So it's interesting to see how Matt Dinniman has to find new ways to make it interesting. And one of those, which big advantage I didn't realize was in lit RPG, is the world building is a lot more than just, hey, game and level up. And I think a bad way to do it is if it's all just you're level 2 now, you're level 3 now, you're level 4 now.
Thing is, that does speak to what we like.
That is true. I'm saying
because there are a lot of people that the focus that they want to read is, I want to understand about the leveling process. I want to play this game in my head with these characters. I want to think about how they're increasing their levels. I want to think about the combinations of attacks and all these things together. Like the magic progression system is the focus and draw. At least for us, like that could be fun, but it's not the draw for me, at least.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, I guess how would you say lit RPG do you agree with how it could get wrong, and then how do you do it well?
Yeah, if that's an aspect to it. I mean, power creep is a common.
Oh, is that the term for it? Power creep?
Believe so.
Oh,
like so a lot.
You're a power creep.
Thanks.
The fuck.
So I'm a power bottom, a power creep. Yeah. But no, I remember the stuff of childhood is like, again, bringing up Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball has the same problem of, after Goku goes Super Saiyan, it's like, all right, he's now Super Saiyan. Where do we go from here? Guess where he goes from there?
Double Super Saiyan?
Super Saiyan 2.
No, you're joking.
No, I'm not.
I actually didn't know that.
And you know how you know the difference between Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan 2?
Does he yell louder?
Yes, but also there's lightning around him. Little spark of lightning.
Oh, shit.
You know what happens at Super Saiyan 3?
Okay, so if there's lightning and sparkle, it beams.
He loses his eyebrows, and he gets really long hair.
Oh.
That's Super Saiyan 3.
What's number 4?
There is no Super Saiyan 4.
Well, we got to come up with that then.
No. Well, actually, okay, yeah, there is. Super Saiyan 4 is he basically turns into a monkey. You know what Super Saiyan 5 is?
He loses his hair.
No, there is no Super Saiyan 5. Super Saiyan God. Then it goes Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan. And then other stuff that I've lost track of.
Again, another fantasy progression that shows you the more powered up you get, the more hair you have. How does that make you feel? That the more powerful a character is, it's just shown that, hey, golden locks and long hair.
I just know that basically God looked down at me and knew I was too powerful and needed to nerf me. I understand. I had too many good things in my life that I just needed, like male pattern baldness.
We need to set this guy back.
Yeah. With hair, he's too powerful. He's too blessed.
Honestly, if God gave you too much confidence, you might have been a much more powerful man. I don't know if that's a good thing. I
know. You're going to, hey, whenever I go to Turkey to get hair transplant surgery, you're going to see a completely different man.
I fear the day. I fear the day. Oh,
even better is
I can barely handle you with a little bit of self-deprecation. If their scale of confidence to humility is there, you're just 1% down. But then if you get that hair transplant surgery, you're going to Chad mode of you are
that's
suave.
I have checked off a lot of things of like goals in life and things I need to obtain as a human being, as a man. Hair is one of the checkboxes still left on the list.
And because of modern technology,
there's a couple other things,
still possible.
That's a possible checkmark now.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, that would have just always been something of, it's always an L.
Mm-hmm.
But one day.
Wow.
I just need like 6-pack abs and hair, and I will have basically done everything I need to do. I will have accomplished.
Yeah, we're not talking if that's the case. Just I won't be able to tolerate you.
Why would I be on this podcast?
You don't need me anymore.
No.
So that was progression RPG. Did you answer yet about how that could go wrong? Right? You were saying, you're talking Super Saiyan.
Yeah, I mean that's the power creep. And thing is, it's not even I don't even think that stuff's a problem. It's a problem with storytelling in general. But
yeah.
If you're reading that stuff, it's not really the point. The point is fun. And so, like, as a kid, I don't care. I don't care with it. Like, story wise, like, is Super Saiyan 3 very interesting? It was cool. It was like, oh, look, it's so exciting. He's yelling loud, and he threw the beam really large, and yay, fun. That's all it needs to be. It needs to be fun.
Wow.
As soon as it stops being fun, then that's where you went wrong.
How about a lit RPG erotica?
I'm sure it exists.
It's gotta at some point.
It's got that. That's like the dregs of storytelling of like, yeah.
Just combine two subgenres and create.
You're leaning on the base emotions of human interest.
Yeah.
Nothing of substance beneath. Just
dopamine, as in leveling up, just scrolling, going, oh, next level, next TikTok. Okay, good. Level.
And then just lust.
Pleasure. There it is. Every time you level up, it gets more sexually provocative as you get throughout the book.
Yes.
And so it starts rather tame.
Oh, so a sexual progression fantasy.
Yes.
The way you level up.
Oh.
Yeah.
That
probably already exists.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did we create something new? Or?
No, we didn't. I know that some freaks out there already. They're going to tell us in the comments, like, there's like 15 series, basically that.
I need to know.
I know.
I still like our idea for the cozy fantasy, creating the farm to save the world so you can be the farm boy. I love that idea.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I do too. That would be fun. Of just like, what's coming. You know the story, you know what's going to happen. And like, you don't have to worry about the demon lord, the dark one. It's just, hey, in 5 years, or like whatever, or maybe not even 5 years, but like, I know you arrive and you go, what is this place? And you see like, it's only like two houses, and it's just like the town of the hero, and you go, that's the hero where. This is the place the hero is born. He's a farm boy, and he does all this stuff. And you look around, it's like, man, there's only like 2 houses.
Where's the farm?
Where's the farm? Farm boy can't be born without the farm. And so you must build the farm for the farm boy to be born.
And then is it a question about prophecy? And did he complete the prophecy because he knew it would happen and he was always fated to build the farm? Or is it maybe could be a question about, was that his choice to build the farm, or was he the prophecy itself?
Or you forget about all that and just go like, hey, what are these fantasy carrots? And how does it affect the farmland? And it's like, man, these fantasy carrots actually act a lot like berries.
And then when the Gandalf character,
instead of in the ground, they come off of trees.
And when the Gandalf character comes, that would be kind of cool. The Gandalf character comes to the end of the book, cozy fantasy, and you're just looking at the carrots, and in the back of his mind is prepping for this long journey he has to eventually do. It's basically Bilbo before the Shire.
Yeah.
But then when Gandalf comes to the cozy fantasy farmland, it says, hey, it's ready to go on your adventure. Looks at the carrots and goes, no, thank you. And it doesn't have that Bilbo, hey, then gets dragged out by Gandalf. That's the whole thing. He gets so attached to this farm.
No, he
loves it so much.
He tells the Gandalf character, it's like, you're too early. Come back in 50 years.
50 years from now. Not yet.
That's
not
not
on
me.
my watch.
That's the next one.
I'm just here to farm.
I'm building the farm. The farm boy comes later.
Yep. That's a great story.
That's a fun one.
Okay. Our next one is the Western. Mistborn Era 2, Western Fantasy. Mistborn Era 2, the Dark Tower series with Gunslinger, I think, being book 1.
Yep.
But yeah, Western setting, self-explanatory. You got your guns. You got your Westernish. You got
your man on the outside of the law.
Your outcast.
Either outside of the law or the man of the law, typically.
Lays down the law.
Generally, you're on the outskirts of society. Society is behind us. You're on the frontier. That's generally what you're dealing with.
Yep.
So, however you got to fit those ideas into a fantasy setting works. Can you tell it without guns? Do you think you could tell a Western fantasy without a gun? I personally think you can, because rather than the setting and like trying to make it the imagery of it, you could just tell the type of Western story of the magical frontier. It's like, I think if you have like the magical world, and that our main character or characters are on the outskirts of the land and trying to conquer this untamed territory of
Are there
magic.
horses?
No.
No
Magical
horses?
horses. They're unicorns.
All right, then it's Western. Yeah.
It counts. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's the feeling of a Western that you need to get right. Because other than that, it would just be like something close to steampunk or Flintlock fantasy.
Your story idea is a Western fantasy.
Yep. Basically centers around that idea of there is
Flintlock type, yeah.
Yeah, where there is a society, but there is, the Wild West. There's the wild frontier of magic. And you have our main character like in that area trying to tame a untamed land.
Yes.
Or other things. I'm being vague, but yes, it is a magical Western story.
Now, a Western erotica, you have to tame the beast.
Oh, isn't that every erotica? Isn't that the whole point?
My mind's just going all over the place of how to combine every genre with that. It's everything could be combined.
Well, every subgenre could be an erotica subgenre.
Yeah,
that's very
what I'm
easy.
Yeah,
it's probably the easiest one to do.
The easiest, yeah.
Yeah, just add copious amounts as long as it's about like 50% sex scene. I think that'll do it. That'll turn any genre into an erotica genre.
Or you can make them comedies because they'll be hilarious. I'm getting some funny images of having the duel, but an erotic duel with me.
I mean, that's Name of the Wind book 2.
I haven't read that yet.
Apparently.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't read it either, but apparently that's a thing.
The Wise Man Fears, or that's what the book's called, right?
I think so.
Well, should we give it a shot?
No. God, no.
Oh, our next subgenre is Academia, Dark Academia, which Name of the Wind is an academia in the academia subgenre. So is The Will of the Many, Harry Potter, and Blood Over Brighthaven. You see a lot of stories like this where it's fantasy setting, but takes place primarily in a school system or school. It could be anywhere from elementary type school, high school, to collegiate or different levels of education and what you're attempting to do at the school. But the whole feature is it's taking place in a school setting, and you have a lot of those tropes that are fun to follow. We can all relate to. We've all been to school. So it's such a great setting to set up and go, oh, look at this one. Usually have libraries and they're mysterious, or there's cool ways to, if you're a wizard, learning spells, or there's deeper mysteries about the school you haven't learned. You can play with a lot of fun things in the academia, Dark Academia, that are neat and very, very easy to touch on the nostalgia again of the reader.
What's something that genre does really well that like it has a real advantage in?
Yeah, I'd say probably that exploration feature. That I'm thinking Harry Potter's the quintessential example. The school camaraderie that we can all relate to as readers, as people, of looking back. Everybody's knows familiar tropes in our own lives of having your best friend, having the nerd character, having the tropes, the archetypal characters, but then making it fun because the magic and mystery of the school, whether it's learning spells or what the professors are doing or what the head of the school, and you know how we explained in the last episode, I think it was for low fantasy, that you get introduced to our real world, which is low fantasy, and then you go to this portal where you now go to a new world, and in this new world you're learning everything for the first time. And so you're learning Hogwarts for the first time, or Percy, you're learning the Olympians and all the magic. The school setting is usually it starts off with you're new to the school and you're figuring out how this school works, just like with everybody else. So it's the unlocking of the magic. It's the unlocking of the mystery behind the school. That's kind of cool. So it's almost if you're in here's the cool thing. If it's a high fantasy world with an academia feature to it, you can get the advantages of a low fantasy in a high fantasy because it's already a different world. It's already fantasy. However, you get the character who, instead of being new to the fantasy world, instead of being new to Middle Earth, you are new to a school in your world. So you get all the features of being a new character to this place and discovering things so the reader also discovers, but also all the features of a high fantasy, which is you have these things that the characters are already familiar with, of how their culture works, of how things work. They basically that. So I think it's a cool ability to kind of get the best of both of those.
Mhm.
And it also touches on everybody's been to school. So you get, I think academia has a ton of advantages, and clearly why Harry Potter is one of the most successful ever. The fact that it's focused on the wizards and the fantasy elements, but school. It's such a unifying, understandable trope to use.
Well, it's taking the magical chaos that you make in a fantasy story and giving a setting of order. That a fantasy world, you have to completely make up the reasons on why certain characters will be together in this chaotic, wide expansive world. Why are two characters going to interact? Why are they going to be antagonistic toward each other? What overarching goals, aims, how are people getting in each other's way? With an academia story, it's so simple. It's written for you right there. One, why these characters are together. Why are two characters in the same room? Well, class or dorms, whatever. It's made for you right there. Hey, why are characters in conflict? Well, they're school rivals, or one's a bully, or this teacher for some reason doesn't like them, and it just writes itself almost of it taking this chaotic world and making a very easy order that you can play around with, and you don't have to contrive a bunch of random nonsense to get things to work together.
Exactly. And that progression fantasy we were just talking about, school's a progression system.
Yep.
Often, whether it's in one book or you do it over several books, of how do you graduate, get to the next level, whether it's a magic school or what. With the Will of the Many, no spoilers, but the Will of the Many part of it is about progressing to get to ultimate goal, and how you do that is cool. You're invested. You're seeing how does the character use what they've learned in school to solve said scenario. So you get the facets as well of that RPG. Ooh, you have new knowledge, new abilities. How do you solve next problem?
Yep.
Yeah, Academia is a classic. It's awesome.
Yeah, especially if you're exploring a brand new secondary world. The Academia is school. You get to learn. It's a lot.
Yep.
It's a lot less awkward. It's still kind of awkward, but if your main character is sitting through their history class in this magical world, well, look at that convenient way to info dump the magical backstory of this world. Same thing with the magic system. Well, we're going to learn the magic system in class. So,
right.
Yeah, it's an acceptable setting to make a lot of your storytelling a lot easier.
Yes. And how do you do it wrong?
You do all of those things and only those things. What I just said of if the character goes to the history class and then just gets a lecture about the history and then we move on, it's ugh, boring. Do two things, please, at the same time.
At least two.
At the same time that we're receiving a history lesson about this new world, we get an introduction of your rival character, of being just a know-it-all brat, or just the dumb kid who's bullying you. Whatever aspect, you all set up the rivalry, you set up maybe the romance of in the middle of our exposition, we get distracted by the new love interest, and so the teacher fades down the background. Do something else there. That's a setting, it's a tool to be used, but if that's all it's for, if you're nothing without the Academia, you don't deserve it.
Just a veneer again.
It's a veneer.
That's all it is. Don't like it.
Do more. Do a little bit extra.
Do not do what the Name of the Wind did. That. All right.
More. Yeah. God. It sucks
Actually,
that's an Academia book, and the Academia was the worst part by far.
There's one scene I went,
Yeah. It's the same
It's
scene.
that scene,
It's that scene was that was fun.
that was,
That's sad. God, that book makes me sad.
The next one's Portal Fantasy. Portal Fantasy, you're isekai in a way.
Yeah.
Your Portal
basically.
Fantasy is you're in Narnia and you open up the closet and go to an entirely different world, where the interesting thing about Portal Fantasy is low fantasy versus high fantasy. It's basically a low fantasy setting and transporting to a high fantasy world where it's a completely new world, but you start on Earth. and that is Portal Fantasy.
Portal Fantasy requires a person from our world, exactly, not a modified version of our world, not a fantastical part of our world, but like basically one of us, a regular human, and then thrusted into a high fantasy world.
Narnia.
Yep. Narnia, the Magician's Nephew, which is in, same world.
Pendragon. Pendragon would
Portal
be.
Fantasy.
Yes.
You would also have Orson Scott Card's the Gate Thief series. Kind of.
The book we read,
That sort of counts.
I think so.
He has portals.
One that's literally Portal Fantasy because Samwise had us read it because he won. Remember, he won the competition of we get to read
Another
any book.
Kingdom.
Another Kingdom is
Yes.
a Portal Fantasy. I really didn't like it though. It was that veneer. It was
Yeah.
But it was a Portal Fantasy where literally the concept of the book was you open a door and randomly will get transported to this other world.
The gimmick was kind of fun of it just randomly happening. Like couldn't control that. Sometimes when he opened up and went through a doorway, he would be transported to another world instead of his others.
Yeah.
Which was relevant in some plot details of like he's on, being chased away. And so, it's fun. But yeah, the story itself could use work.
It was like every door was a portal if it randomly happened. That's definitely a Portal Fantasy. And yeah, that's what your portal is. I guess advantages, disadvantages, how well, bad. How do you determine what a good Portal Fantasy is?
I do see on the notes up there that you have Harry Potter listed as Portal Fantasy. Why is that? I don't think that would really count.
No, I don't think it is.
Oh, well, you wrote it wrong then.
Yeah, I was quick noting.
Okay.
I was just trying to quick note stuff and.
All right, I just wanted to judge you for you getting things wrong. Just make that public for people.
Actually, it is a Portal Fantasy.
Go ahead.
Harry Potter.
Defend us. Let's do it.
What Harry Potter does is he runs into a wall.
Yeah.
Runs in on 7th, whatever. Oh, God, I'm not a big enough fan, I guess, to remember what train station it is. 9 3/4? Oh, God. Oh.
Actually, I think that is it.
Is it? Harry Potter. What is the train station? Is it 9 3/4? That would be. Oh, my God, it is.
Yeah.
Wow. I was not too confident. Okay. So runs into the 9 3/4, which is a literal portal that then brings Harry Potter and others to Hogwarts.
Now, technically, a portal is a connection of two places separate in space, but 9 3/4 is still in that same London station.
So is Narnia's closet.
No, it's a completely different world.
Well, I thought you were talking about the station versus the closet.
No,
Like the
you're
closet,
going from
the
the
wardrobe
station
for
to
real.
a different, like, sub-dimension of that same station.
Yeah, portal, exactly.
You're not going to a new realm. You're still in London at the metro station.
No, that's right.
Like
but
at the tube.
But the portal, I'm saying, is the wall. It's, when you run the cart into the wall, portal. Now you're in Hogwarts. Prove me wrong. Tell me that's not a portal.
Can you have a magical transportation without it being a portal? What's the definition of a portal?
Let's see. Define portal. Here we go. Portal, a doorway, gate, or other entrance, especially a large and imposing one.
I guess it counts. Fine.
Yeah.
Harry Potter's a portal
Who looks
fantasy.
stupid now? We both do.
We both do.
We both lost.
Every time.
Okay. So that is now our next one here is magical realism. Magical realism is defined as it's a literary and artistic genre where magical or fantastical elements are introduced into an otherwise realistic setting. The magic is presented as a normal part of everyday life, often without explanation or surprise by the characters. An example of this I've not read, but 100 Years of Solitude is known as a cornerstone of magical realism. And yeah, we've not read that yet, but magical realism, any personal opinions on it of how to do it well, bad, what it is?
I enjoy it. It's probably one of my favorite subgenres, but I would say Stormlight Archive counts as magical realism. Just generally, almost everything in the Cosmere counts that way. Another one that would count. I'm trying to think. Oh, actually, I would think king of it would be Malazan.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Magical
Yeah.
like that is definitely a realm where the magic is treated as an everyday occurrence in the world and is often unexplained. It just is. Wouldn't that count?
I'm gonna have to look up to clarify because I didn't think maybe I'm just thinking what magical realism is wrong about.
Oh,
My
introduced into an
understanding,
otherwise
yeah,
realistic
yeah,
setting.
because the realistic setting it can't like Stormlight and that are completely made up settings. Like for example,
Oh,
I think
I may be misinterpreting
I th-
of it
I
needs to be
think-
basically our world.
but so it's like a fictional town. Does that make sense? I think magical realism is more so. It's not low fantasy as in it's Earth. It's not Earth in New York City, but it's called like New York Pity, or it's a different. Yeah, I'm not on fire today. Like zero jokes hitting. But you're in some sort of city, some sort of area that isn't actually Earth, but it's a thing that looks realistic like a city we would recognize. And there's magical elements. I think that's more what magical realism is. So take a town. I think the example 100 Years of Solitude, that is a cornerstone of magical realism. It says because it's telling the story of a multi-generational story of the Bundia family in the fictional town of Macondo, where magical events happen alongside everyday life. So that's more so of what it is of take yourself in a town, fictional town, and magic is commonplace, essentially. So that kind of
Gotcha.
story. And we haven't read much of these, I don't think.
No, not particularly.
And I hear it's mainly, I don't want to get this wrong, but I hear it's a big genre in Latin America, South America. That is where you get a lot of these magical realism stories, or were more of the cornerstones. And
I think it's a cozy fantasy version of this.
Yeah.
Of magical realism. Do you remember? It's a story somewhere along the lines of So You Have a Dragon, where the whole thing is like dragons are fairly commonplace and how people like deal with dragons as pets in the home. And like they need to warm your tea and you have to like be careful around.
Where
like,
did I hear this from?
It may have been you. You may have been told me about it. I'm trying. Please,
Where did I
someone in
hear
the comments
this?
tell us about this.
Yeah.
It's the one where like the dragon little teacup.
I know where this is from.
What is it from?
I know where this is from. Wow.
What is it from?
That's hilarious how you came up with that, because I think that comes from a submission that somebody sent us about their story idea on our world building episode.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
It
damn.
stuck with you that well. We should reach out because it was
We
their.
should.
It was
That's
their.
stuck in my head.
I'm remembering it now because it was their cozy fantasy idea of mini dragons. It was definitely that. It was
like,
in our episode
yeah.
with world building submissions. One of our patrons sent that submission, and we were just reacting to these, and they had a fantasy world where they only had a paragraph or 200 words, whatever we said to describe. They said it was dragons are extremely commonplace. They're tinier dragons, but they're used to do simpler things like warm up your tea. Da 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 da. That is it's not a real story. That is their submission. I'm 100% positive.
That's cool.
Wow, that's
stuck in the
callback
head for a while.
That's cool. If you, wow.
Also sad that I can only remember the not story fictional thing and not an actual example off the top of my head.
But the fact that is crazy that you remembered that and assumed it was a story just because they pitched a really good idea. That's cool.
Yeah,
That's cool.
They didn't win though.
No.
Who won?
Well, we had two people tied. And by the way, we're talking about a video where we did, I think, world building
competition.
If anyone's curious, it's like world building submissions ranked to Ramble. It might come up if you want to see that episode. But two people are tied, Salty's idea and then the actual winner, which I'm forgetting, but both of them had very cool emotionally tied magic, if you remember.
Yeah,
there
were good ones.
They were good. Yeah. I wanted to read a whole
I still remember
story.
Salty's one about like the ozone being eaten by these magical creatures, and like it's so cool.
Very cool. But yeah, so your example was a submission. But that's magical realism, and I guess we're not super well read on that. However, what could you see being the drawbacks of this and the pros of having a magical realism genre?
honestly, I
story.
don't. Again, haven't been really well read in it, but I
Yeah.
don't see any negatives. If anything, like with magic being commonplace, it's a great way to immerse yourself in the world.
Pretty cool.
Like it's a great immersion tactic rather than reminding yourself that the magic is separate from the world or it's special. It's commonplace. It just exists.
Yep. Got an example, maybe. Okay, short story. Very short story. The Paper Menagerie
Oh, sure.
is
Yeah.
a cool thing where the little small fantasy element in it is that his mother can create these paper menageries that move around. And I think that's magical realism.
Yeah. No. I think it's low fantasy because it's still our world.
Oh, is it?
So it has
yeah,
to
it
be
is.
in a
Fake,
world
yeah.
that is completely fictional.
But similar, realistic enough to be our own world.
I think
yeah.
the story that would come closest that we've both read would be Guy Gavriel Kay's Lions of Alrasan, because it is technically a fictional world of like it is not our Earth. It has 2 moons.
Esperanza, not España. Yeah.
Yeah, and also has magical mind magic element to it. It's barely there, but technically
It exists somewhere.
It
Yeah.
exists. I guess it's not commonplace.
Yeah,
So
so
again,
it's
doesn't
not.
count.
Yeah, doesn't
Man,
count.
we need some good recommendations then. Let us
Give
know.
us give us some. I guess this 100 Years of Solitude is the cornerstone, they say. So
Apparently so.
that. But okay, next one. We have 2 more, and our second to last is the superhero subgenre of fantasy. Now, considering this a subgenre, if we're again agreeing fantasy is things that are impossible using the very broad definition.
Yeah.
So superhero stories, I have not read on them, but I've seen them on films quite a bit.
The last superhero novel I've read, actually, I think it was. Oh shoot! It's been so long. I read this like in high school or maybe early in college. It's the guy who does CinemaSins.
Yes.
He wrote a book about
yeah.
a like fantastical superhero school, but and the main characters are disabled. So I believe the main character is in a wheelchair. You have one of the other main characters is deaf. Have another blind, and the focus is kind of how, in many ways, their disability and their superpower kind of conflict, and kind of how it makes it difficult because at the very beginning you have like a person in a wheelchair but he has super strength, and so it's hard. Like, yes, he's very strong, but he can't jump or it's hard for him to fight and things like that. How does blindness get in the way? But then it's all about them.
Very neat.
Them together are able to compensate for their disabilities and ultimately become like a stronger team and all this stuff.
That's great.
But I thought it was a fun story when
That's
I read
great.
it. Yeah,
Sweet.
I think he has other books. That was fun.
Yeah.
Also, it's narrated by the CinemaSins guy, and he has a good voice.
Nice. Yeah, your superhero story is self-explanatory. What a
Yeah.
superhero story is.
How to do it wrong. Watch Marvel. For the past how many years? When did Endgame come out?
19.
Yeah, so for the past 5-ish years, that's how you do superheroes wrong.
I heard Thunderbolts was good. I didn't see that though. And Guardians 3 I heard was good. I didn't see that though.
Guardians 3
And-
was fun. That was a good one.
Dom tells me that it's going to be one of my favorites. He says it's incredible.
No.
Oh.
I-
Oh. Don't tell
It's
him.
good.
Don't tell him that.
You won't think it's incredible. You will like it. It's a good one.
Okay.
But you won't love it as much as he's making out to be.
Okay, it's good to temper my expectations. He's been really hyping it up. But yeah, your superheroes doing it right. How?
You're doing it right by the superpower kind of just highlights a personal problem, a personal conflict. Superman, it's identity and his doing what's right versus doing what is good for the individual. So, always Clark Kent having to sacrifice for the good of Superman and everyone else. Batman being, revenge and your personal code and like keeping away the darkness, all that kind of stuff.
Spidey Man.
Spidey Man, the classic,
the best
hero story and message of, with great power comes great responsibility, which in all honesty is basically that's the correct superhero message every time. That is the quintessential superhero message. It's literally Superman's message, kind of, in a roundabout way. It's Batman, kind of. He has great abilities and powers, and now he has a responsibility. It's all of them. So how do you do it?
Every superhero has powers.
Yeah, but how do you do it wrong? How do you do a superhero story wrong?
Well, you said Marvel. Marvel stuff.
You focus on the powers themselves and not what those powers necessarily cause for our character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, make it basically if it's about the character gaining powers. Let's say the character has a problem with family and there's a rift between him and his family. Mm-hmm. Well, the powers, when he gets them, should in some way exacerbate the problems with the rift in his family. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, through his journey, he is able to bring them close together.
Yeah,
and not necessarily not because of the powers. The powers are partly a problem, but the actual character prevails in the end.
Yeah,
that's about it. Like, yeah. I don't know. It's God. Storytelling is honestly a lot easier than like a lot of Hollywood seems to think it is. It's like the powers are flashy and cool, and how does it relate, and how does it make a very personal story more bombastic and fun?
Just to spite Marvel, we should write a script about this farm boy thing.
Yeah.
Like literally an hour. Spend an hour going, here's the story. That's it.
Yeah. Actually, I think that would be a very fun short story we could write together of, our hero creating the farm for the future farm boy hero.
Let's do it.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
But not a superhero. He's no superhero.
No.
He's got to be nice, cozy stuff. Okay, our last subgenre is the more historical, mythological fantasy. Some overlap with Sword and Sorcery and others, but this is a book that is set in a recognizable historical period or uses real historical settings, events, or figures, but incorporates magical, supernatural, or mythical elements that do not actually exist in history. So with magical realism, the reason Lions of Elverson more so wouldn't be one, because magical realism is magic, it's commonplace, and it's a fictional world that could be somewhere on Earth, but that it's realistic, however, not real. Where historical mythological fantasy, it's a recognizable historical time period. For example, the Lions of Elverson takes place in the early Middle Ages in Spain and is representative of real world history. However, as a fictionalized story with fictionalized characters and how it interacts with this history.
Somewhat. Some of the characters are not actually completely fictional. Especially two of the main characters are heavily inspired on real historical figures. Actually, not more than two, actually, because Alvar is also a real figure.
Yeah, this would be so it's recognizable and uses real figures, but incorporates magical, supernatural, mythical elements. In that case, I think it dives pretty far into the fiction, though, for those characters. I'm sure they didn't do any of those things. But this is another one of your similar, could be called historical fiction. So
the Winter King would also fall into this. Well, depends on how you interpret it.
True. Yes.
Yes. But I'm mainly saying with the whole mythological aspect of it.
Yep.
Could fall into this.
Definitely.
What do you think this genre really does well? What does it do better than others?
Ooh. I like this genre. Lions of Elverson is a top 10 book for me, by the way. Just again, it's one of those awesome books. So I think this genre almost reads more. This genre almost reads more like historical fiction than it does fantasy. Because when I think Lions of Elverson, I think more so historical fiction. And the issue is because we've been talking about how often when there's a veneer of fantasy, you don't use the fantasy genre properly. It's frustrating. Well, the reason this is number 26 as well, I think it's the least. It's not when you think fantasy, you think this, you know? And I think the positive of the historical mythological is that often the complaint of using fantasy as a veneer, well, this isn't using fantasy as a veneer at all. It is giving you a more sort of historical fiction, a mythological feel. And the fantasy is a little bit of icing and some cool, superfluous sometimes, but intentionally so, to where you're able to get a cool alternate history with some fantastical elements, but the fantastical elements aren't supposed to wow you as well. They are there as a side component and side piece, intentionally so. And so it gets you... I think that's the advantage of it, is automatically going in. I'm not, when I read Jade City, for example, I'm going, okay, this is a fantasy book, this fantasy element, this should be integral. When I'm reading something like a historical mythological fantasy, I'm much more reading, okay, what's this alternative twist or alternative look at this time period? And a big advantage is you get to use the knowledge people have of this time period that it's set in. So if you are a fan of early medieval history, well, look, here, I'm going to set you right in it, and then I'm going to give you a cool-ass story in a time period you like to read about. So that's obviously another advantage. But what do you think? Were you thinking similar lines of why it's got some advantages over other subgenres?
It has some advantages of... In general, I think the level of prose tends to be more advanced.
We're just thinking
and more fun.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of a certain, because it doesn't lean on the fantastical nature of it, and it leans, because it takes a lot of research to tell the more historical novel, you got to get it right. And so with the research and the time it takes to tell the story, generally pretty well written.
Right.
Even if it's, maybe it's not an interesting story to you, but I would generally tend to believe it's well written. But those are some of the maybe advantages.
I mean, the two I'm thinking of are just phenomenal writers, though. Bernard Cornwell and Guy Gavriel are the best.
I'll give one that it's not a book, but still it will fall into this genre. And it's a reason because I put it into this genre, and I don't think you did, I liked it and you didn't.
Oh, what's that?
The Northman, the movie.
Yeah.
I considered it a mythological fantasy movie,
right,
rather than a revenge movie, which at a certain point I'm going like, oh, this is a Viking mythology. Like I'm picturing it going, this is the story that a Viking is telling around the campfire, and like that's why it's so mystical and weird, and some of the elements don't feel like actual people but like a myth. And that's what I enjoyed about it.
Yeah,
you were going like, this is a really piss poor revenge story.
Yeah.
And it kind of is.
Well, part of it too, that the trailers they were dropping on that was, revenge. So my expectations going in were all revenge story. Yeah. All right, give me a revenge story. Yeah.
I think is all the revenge stuff, I barely remember any of it.
Oh, yeah.
But all the mystical stuff, like that's the stuff that I remember about it. And just how Viking it was, of the lesson, the moral, like it just was people that weren't like us was fun. Like these are clearly an older people that aren't westernized necessarily.
It felt of the time.
It felt authentically Viking.
Yes. I could see that.
And I'm, as for what I imagine Vikings should be.
Yeah.
It felt authentic.
Fair. That's Roger, not Ebert, Eggers. Robert Eggers does that. And he has a lot of interesting films. I've seen that in Nosferatu as well, which still got to see Lighthouse, The Witch. But yeah, I guess maybe
really
I should
looking
rewatch
forward
The
to
Northman
Lighthouse.
going in with that, because revenge story stuff, I didn't like the revenge. But that I could see the mythological being cool.
But yeah, that was the exploration of the mythological, and then the twisting of like, this is a Viking revenge story. So it's not really the same. It doesn't hit the same emotionally.
Got it.
It was fun that way.
Yeah. But that's our list of all 26 fantasy subgenres. We hope you got something out of this.
I hope the main thing I'm hoping you get out of this is, man, they need to read X book from said genre they clearly don't know enough in. We'd love to hear that.
Would love to. Please send in the comments below, and we promise we can't read it immediately because our TBR is rough. However, it would be lovely to know when we do want to dive into these other subgenres what to read.
Yep.
What is your favorite subgenre? Let us know. And also, remember, World Anvil, thank you for sponsoring this episode. If you want to go use code Ramble at World Anvil, remember to do that. Rich, anything else before signing off?
Yeah. Basically, if you think we missed a genre, don't let us know because you're wrong. There's only 26. Only ever will be 26. That are the only things that exist. Bye, everyone.